Margaret Hale stood on the porch of her ranch house, her rifle held loosely in one hand, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting long shadows across the dry land, and the group of Apache warriors before her seemed to merge with the gathering darkness. There were at least 15 of them, maybe more, all mounted on horses that stood perfectly still, their riders watching her with expressions she could not read. The man at the front dismounted with a grace that belied his size. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his long black hair streaked with silver and tied back with leather cord. His face was weathered, lined with age and experience, but his eyes were sharp, alive, burning with an intensity that made Margaret feel exposed, as if he could see straight through her skin and into the core of who she was. He took 2 steps forward and stopped. Margaret forced herself to breathe. She had faced down cattle thieves, rattlesnakes, and the cruel judgment of her neighbors, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The chief spoke, his voice deep and steady. "You are the woman who saved my daughters." It was not a question. Margaret nodded slowly, her throat dry. "I did what anyone should have done." The man's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Not anyone," he said. "Most would have ridden past. Most would have looked away. You did not." Margaret felt the weight of his words settle over her. She glanced toward the house, where Kaya and Elu were watching from the window, their faces pale but relieved. They had told her in broken English and gestures that their father was a respected leader, a man of honor and tradition. Margaret had not expected him to come with so many warriors. She had not expected him to come at all. The chief followed her gaze. "My daughters speak of your kindness. They say you fed them, healed them, asked for nothing in return." He paused, his eyes returning to her. "This creates a debt." Margaret shook her head. "There's no debt. I don't want anything." The chief's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "What you want does not erase what is. In my people's way, when one saves the life of another, a bond is formed. Blood calls to blood. Honor demands acknowledgement." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine despite the heat. She lowered her rifle, letting it hang at her side. "I don't understand." The chief gestured to the land around them, the dry hills, the sparse grass, the distant mountains. "You live alone. Your husband is dead. You have no children, no family. The men in the town whisper that you are weak, that you will fail, that a woman cannot hold land like this." Margaret's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was he was right. She had heard those whispers herself. She had felt their eyes on her every time she went into town, had seen the way they dismissed her, the way they waited for her to crumble. The chief continued, his voice calm but firm. "You saved my daughters from men who would have hurt them, perhaps killed them. This is not a small thing. This is everything. And so I have come to make a decision, as is my right and my duty." Margaret's breath caught. She did not know what to expect. Part of her feared he would demand something she could not give, that he would take her land or her life in some ritual she did not understand. But another part of her, a deeper part she barely recognized, felt something else: curiosity, hope, a strange, fluttering anticipation. The chief turned and spoke in his own language to the warriors behind him. 2 of them dismounted and came forward. Margaret's eyes widened as she saw them clearly for the first time. They were younger than the chief, perhaps in their early 30s, both lean and strong, with the kind of bodies that came from a life lived outdoors, under the sky in constant motion. One had long hair that fell past his shoulders, his face marked with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. The other had shorter hair and eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and warmth in equal measure. The chief gestured to them. "These are my sons, Takoda and Nashoba. They are warriors, hunters, men of honor. They will stay with you." Margaret blinked. "Stay with me?" The chief nodded. "You need protection. You need help. The men who chased my daughters will return. They will not forgive what you did, and there are others who wish to take what is yours. My sons will remain here. They will guard you, work your land, ensure that no harm comes to you or to what you have built." Margaret felt her pulse quicken. She looked at the two men standing before her. Takoda, the one with the scar, met her gaze with a steady, unreadable expression. Neshoba, the one with the warm eyes, gave her a small nod, something that might have been reassurance. She shook her head, confusion and disbelief warring inside her. "I can't accept this. I don't need—" The chief raised a hand, silencing her gently. "This is not for you to accept or refuse. This is my decision. My daughters' lives are worth more than gold, more than land, more than anything in this world. You gave them back to me. I give you my sons, not as payment, but as a bond. They will protect you, because you protected what is most precious to me." Margaret felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "What if I don't want this?" The chief studied her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost kind. "Then you are a fool. But I do not think you are a fool. I think you are a woman who has been alone too long, who has forgotten what it is to have others stand beside her. My sons will remind you." He turned and walked back to his horse, mounting with the same effortless grace. The other warriors began to move, preparing to leave. Kaya and Elu emerged from the house, running to their father. He embraced them both, his expression finally softening, and Margaret saw in that moment the depth of his love for them, the relief and gratitude he would never fully put into words. The chief spoke to his daughters in their language, and they nodded, glancing back at Margaret with shy smiles before mounting horses that were brought forward for them. The chief looked at Margaret one last time. "Take care of my sons," he said, "and let them take care of you." Then he was gone, the group disappearing into the twilight, leaving only dust and silence behind. Margaret stood frozen, her mind spinning. She turned to look at Takoda and Neshoba, who remained standing in front of her porch, their few belongings slung over their shoulders. Takoda's expression was serious, guarded. Neshoba offered her a tentative smile. She swallowed hard. "I suppose you'd better come inside." The first night was awkward beyond measure. Margaret had no idea how to navigate this strange new reality. She showed the two men to the small room at the back of the house that had once been a storage space. They laid out blankets on the floor without complaint, moving with a quiet efficiency that spoke of lives spent adapting to circumstances beyond their control. Margaret made stew, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the pot. She had lived alone for 5 years. 5 years of silence, of solitude, of nights where the only sounds were the wind and the creaking of old wood. And now there were 2 men in her home, Apache warriors no less, and she had no idea what to say to them, how to act, whether to treat them as guests or workers or something else entirely. When she called them to the table, they came without a word. Takoda sat stiffly, his eyes scanning the room as if cataloguing every exit, every potential threat. Neshoba sat more easily, his posture relaxed, and when Margaret handed him a bowl, he thanked her in careful English. They ate in silence. Margaret forced herself to swallow the food, though her stomach was in knots. Finally, she could stand it no longer. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "If you don't want to be here, you can leave. I won't tell your father." Takoda's eyes flickered to her, but he said nothing. Neshoba set down his spoon and leaned forward slightly. "We want to be here," he said, his voice gentle. "Our father's decision is our honor. We do not question it." Margaret shook her head. "But you don't know me. I don't know you. This is strange," Neshoba finished for her, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Yes, it is strange, but many things in life are strange. That does not make them wrong." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that eased the tightness in her chest just a little. Kindness. Understanding. He was not here because he had to be. He was here because he chose to be, and that made all the difference. Takoda finally spoke, his voice rough, as if unused to speaking. "The men who chased our sisters. They will come." Margaret nodded. "I know." "Then you need us," Dakota said simply. And just like that, the conversation was over. They finished their meal, cleaned the dishes without being asked, and retreated to their room. Margaret lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people breathing in her home. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also something else. Something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt less alone. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Dakota and Neshoba rose before dawn, working the land with a skill and strength that left Margaret both grateful and humbled. They repaired fences she had been meaning to fix for months, cleared brush, tended to the cattle with a patience she had not known was possible. They spoke little, but their presence was constant, reassuring. Margaret found herself watching them. She could not help it. Dakota moved with a controlled precision, every action deliberate, his face rarely betraying emotion. Neshoba was different, lighter somehow, often humming under his breath as he worked, occasionally catching her eye and offering a smile that made her heart skip in a way she had not expected. If you were this woman, living alone for years, would you let two strangers step into your home on a night like this? One evening, as the sun dipped low, Margaret stood at the stove preparing supper when Neshoba came in, carrying an armful of wood. He stacked it neatly by the fireplace and then paused, watching her. "You cook every night," he said. "You work all day, and then you cook. You do not rest." Margaret shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "There's work to be done. Always has been." Neshoba moved closer, and Margaret felt the air shift. He was not crowding her, but he was near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could smell the earth and sun on him. "You do not have to do everything alone anymore," he said softly. Margaret's hands stilled. She looked up at him, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in the fading light of her small kitchen. His eyes were gentle, patient, and something in her chest cracked open just a little. She cleared her throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. "I've been alone a long time. I'm used to it." Neshoba did not push. He simply nodded and moved away, but the air between them remained charged, alive with something unspoken. That night, Margaret lay in bed, unable to sleep. She thought about Neshoba's words, about the way he looked at her, about the strange ache that had settled in her chest. She thought about Dakota too, the way his eyes followed her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, the quiet strength in him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her husband died. She told herself she was being foolish. She was 47 years old, weathered and worn by life. These men were here out of duty, out of honor, not because they wanted her. But even as she thought it, she could not quite make herself believe it. The trouble came on a Thursday. Margaret was in the barn when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed the rifle she always kept close and stepped outside, her heart hammering. 5 men rode into her yard, led by a man she recognized immediately, Clayton Briggs. He owned a large spread to the east and had made it clear more than once that he thought Margaret had no business holding on to her land. He was a big man, red-faced and mean, with a reputation for cruelty that extended to both his workers and anyone who crossed him. Briggs pulled his horse to a stop and looked down at Margaret with a sneer. "Well, well, the widow Hale. Still playing rancher, I see." Margaret raised her rifle, aiming it squarely at his chest. "Get off my land, Briggs." Briggs laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Now, is that any way to greet neighbors? I just came by to talk." "We have nothing to talk about." Briggs's smile faded. "I think we do. See, I heard you interfered with some business of mine the other day. Couple of Indian girls. My men were teaching them a lesson, and you stuck your nose where it didn't belong." Margaret's grip tightened on the rifle. "Your men were hunting them like animals. I did what any decent person would do." Briggs leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes cold. "Decent? That's a funny word coming from a woman living with 2 Apache bucks. Town's talking, Margaret. Saying all kinds of things about what goes on out here. Heat flooded Margaret's face, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't care what the town says, and I don't care what you think. Now get off my land before I put a bullet in you." Briggs straightened, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "Big talk for a woman alone." "She is not alone." The voice came from behind Margaret, low and dangerous. She glanced over her shoulder and saw Takoda and Neshoba standing there, both armed, both with expressions that could have frozen fire. They had appeared silently, like shadows, and now they stood flanking her, a wall of quiet menace. Briggs's eyes narrowed. "So it's true. You're harboring savages." Takoda stepped forward, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "Ride away," he said, his voice flat and cold, "or we will make you." For a moment, the tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Briggs looked at his men, then back at Takoda and Neshoba. Margaret could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of odds. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "This isn't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." He yanked his horse around and rode off, his men following. Margaret watched them go, her entire body shaking with adrenaline. When they were out of sight, she lowered the rifle and turned to Takoda and Neshoba. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Neshoba reached out and gently took the rifle from her hands. "You do not have to thank us. This is why we are here." Takoda nodded, his expression still serious. "He will come back, with more men." Margaret felt the fear rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "Then we'll be ready." Indeed, Takoda looked at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. It was a small, fleeting thing, but it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing something almost tender. "Yes," he said, "we will." That night Margaret could not sit still. She paced the house, checking the windows, the doors, her mind racing with all the ways Briggs might come back, all the terrible things he might do. Neshoba found her standing at the window, staring out into the darkness. "You should rest," he said gently. Margaret shook her head. "I can't. I keep thinking." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Neshoba stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the steady, grounding presence. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. Margaret nodded, her throat tight. "I've been afraid for a long time. Afraid I'll lose this place. Afraid I'll end up with nothing. Afraid I'll always be alone." Neshoba reached out and very slowly, very gently, placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through her, a shock of warmth and connection that made her breath hitch. "You are not alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." Margaret looked up at him, her vision blurring with tears she had been holding back for days, months, years. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Neshoba's eyes searched hers, and when he spoke his voice was raw with honesty. "Because you saved our sisters, because you are brave, because you deserve kindness, and you have lived too long without it." The words broke something inside her. Margaret felt the tears spill over, hot and unstoppable. Neshoba did not pull away. Instead, he drew her closer, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that was firm and warm and so achingly gentle that she felt herself crumble against him. She buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, let herself release all the loneliness and fear and exhaustion she had been carrying alone for so long. Neshoba held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words in his own language that she did not understand, but that soothed her nonetheless. When the tears finally subsided, Margaret pulled back, embarrassed, wiping at her face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. Neshoba shook his head. "Never apologize for tears. They are a release. They are healing." Margaret looked at him, at the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his expression, and felt something shift inside her, something deep and primal and long dormant. She felt the pull of him, the desire to lean in, to close the distance between them, to find comfort in more than just his words. But she stopped herself. She stepped back, her heart pounding. I should try to sleep. Neshoba nodded, though she saw the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Yes, sleep. We will watch over you. Margaret went to her room, but sleep did not come. She lay in the darkness, her body still humming with the memory of Neshoba's touch, the warmth of his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. She felt alive in a way she had not felt in years, and it terrified her. The next morning, Takoda was gone before dawn. Margaret found Neshoba alone, working on the fence near the southern edge of the property. She walked out to him, carrying water and biscuits. "Where's Takoda?" she asked. Neshoba took the water gratefully, drinking deeply before answering. "He went to scout, to see if Briggs is gathering men." Margaret's stomach twisted. "Do you think he is?" Neshoba's expression was grim. "I think Briggs is a man who does not let insults go unanswered. He will come. The question is when." Margaret sat down on the ground beside him, suddenly exhausted. "I brought this on myself, didn't I? If I had just stayed out of it, none of this would be happening." Neshoba turned to her, his eyes fierce. "No! You saved 2 girls from being hurt, maybe killed. That is never wrong. The fault is with the men who hurt, not with the woman who protects." Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Neshoba reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "You are stronger than you know. You have survived loss, loneliness, the cruelty of others. You are still here, still fighting. That is strength." Margaret looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers intertwined with hers, rough and calloused and so very warm. She felt the heat of him, the solid, undeniable reality of his presence, and something inside her shifted again, a longing so fierce it stole her breath. She met his eyes, and in them she saw the same longing reflected back at her. Neshoba leaned in, his face so close she could feel his breath on her skin. "Margaret," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. She could have pulled away. She could have stood and walked back to the house and pretended this moment never happened. But she did not. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was gentle and tentative, and filled with all the hunger and hope and desperate need she had been holding inside for so long. Neshoba responded immediately, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek as he deepened the kiss. Margaret felt herself melt into him, her body pressing against his, seeking the warmth and connection she had been starved of. His lips were soft, his touch reverent, and she felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief, of release, of a joy she had not known she could still feel. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Neshoba rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first night," he admitted, his voice rough. Margaret let out a shaky laugh. "I didn't know. I thought that we were here only out of duty." Neshoba smiled. "Duty brought us here, but what we feel, that is something else entirely." Margaret's heart soared. She wanted to ask him what he meant, to make him say the words, but before she could, the sound of a horse approaching cut through the air. They sprang apart, both reaching for weapons. Margaret's heart sank. Was it Briggs? Was it over already? But it was Takoda who rode into view, his face grim. He dismounted quickly and strode over to them. "Briggs is gathering men, at least 20. They will come tomorrow, maybe the day after." Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. 20 men? Takoda nodded. "He means to take this land, to drive you out, or worse." Margaret's mind raced. 20 men. How could they possibly defend against that? She looked at Takoda and Neshoba, these 2 men who had come into her life so suddenly, who had given her hope and warmth and something she dared not name. "You should go," she said, her voice breaking. "You should leave before they come. I won't let you die for me." Takoda's expression hardened. "We do not run." Neshoba took her hand again, squeezing it tightly. "We will not leave you. Not now. Not ever." Margaret felt the tears come again, but she blinked them back. "Then we fight." Dakota nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. "Then we fight." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Dakota and Neshoba moved with practiced efficiency, setting traps around the perimeter of the property, fortifying the house, stockpiling ammunition. Margaret worked alongside them, her fear transforming into a steely determination. She would not let Briggs take what was hers. She would not let him hurt the men who had become so much more to her than just protectors. As night fell, they gathered inside the house. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Margaret made a simple meal, and they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When the dishes were cleared, Dakota stood and went to the window, keeping watch. Neshoba remained at the table with Margaret. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. Margaret considered the question. "Yes," she said honestly, "but I'm also angry, and I'm tired of being afraid. I've been afraid for so long, and I'm done with it." Neshoba smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. "Good. Fear is natural, but it should not rule you." Margaret reached out and took his hand. "If we survive this, if we make it through tomorrow, I want—" She trailed off, not knowing how to finish. Neshoba leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. "What do you want, Margaret?" She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "I want to live, really live, not just survive. I want to feel alive again." Neshoba's hand tightened around hers. "You will. We will make sure of it." Dakota's voice cut through the moment. "Someone is coming." Margaret and Neshoba sprang to their feet. Margaret grabbed her rifle and moved to the window. In the moonlight, she saw a single rider approaching slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. As the figure drew closer, Margaret's breath caught. It was a woman, older, Apache, her face lined with age, but her posture proud. Dakota opened the door and stepped out. The woman dismounted and spoke to him in their language. Margaret could not understand the words, but she saw the tension in Dakota's shoulders ease slightly. He turned and gestured for Margaret to come outside. Margaret stepped onto the porch, Neshoba close behind her. The woman looked at her with eyes that seemed to see everything. "You are the one who saved the chief's daughters," she said in heavily accented English. Margaret nodded. "Yes." The woman studied her for a long moment. "I am called Ayana. I am a healer, a wise woman of our people. The chief sent me. He knows of the danger you face. He has sent help." Margaret's heart leapt. "Help?" Ayana nodded. "Warriors, 10 of them. They will arrive by dawn. They will fight beside you because you are now part of our family bound by blood and honor." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "I don't know what to say." Ayana smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Say nothing, accept the gift, and know that you are not alone." The woman turned and spoke to Dakota and Neshoba in their language. Both men bowed their heads respectfully. Then Ayana mounted her horse and rode off into the night, leaving Margaret standing on the porch, her mind reeling. Neshoba put his hand on her shoulder. "You see, you are not alone. You have never been alone." Margaret turned to him and then to Dakota and felt something swell inside her chest, something so big and overwhelming it threatened to burst. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Dakota inclined his head. "We are family now. Family protects each other." That night, Margaret did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the darkness, waiting for dawn. Neshoba sat beside her, his presence a constant comforting warmth. Dakota kept watch from the other side of the house, silent and vigilant. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Margaret saw them. 10 Apache warriors, riding in formation, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. They arrived silently, dismounting and spreading out around the property with the precision of men who had fought many battles. Margaret felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. These men, strangers to her, had come to fight for her because she had saved 2 girls she did not know, because honor and family meant something to them in a way it no longer seemed to mean to the white men who sought to destroy her. Takoda and Nashoba went out to greet the warriors, speaking in low voices, coordinating their defense. Margaret watched them, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and pride. These men, her men, were ready to give their lives for her, and she was ready to fight beside them. By mid-morning, Briggs and his men appeared on the horizon. Margaret counted them, 22 men, all armed, all riding hard toward her property. Her stomach clenched, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. She had faced worse. She had survived worse. She would survive this. Briggs pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of her land, his men fanning out behind him. He looked at the house, at the Apache warriors standing ready, and his face twisted with rage. "You brought savages to fight your battles, Margaret," he shouted. "You think that's going to save you?" Margaret stepped out onto the porch, her rifle in hand. Takoda and Nashoba stood on either side of her, and the other warriors spread out in a defensive line. "I think you should turn around and leave, Briggs," Margaret called back, "before someone gets hurt." Briggs laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're outnumbered. You've got a handful of Indians against 20 good white men. This is over before it starts." Takoda stepped forward, his voice carrying across the distance. "Numbers do not win battles. Courage wins battles. Honor wins battles. You have neither." Briggs's face turned red. "You want to fight? Fine. We'll wipe you out and take this land, and nobody will care. Nobody will even remember you were here." Margaret felt the rage surge inside her. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I will remember, and I will make sure everyone knows what you tried to do here." Briggs raised his hand, signaling his men. "Kill them. Kill them all." The battle erupted in a chaos of gunfire and shouts. Margaret dropped to one knee, firing her rifle at the advancing men. Takoda and Nashoba moved with deadly precision, their shots finding targets with an accuracy that left Margaret breathless. The other warriors fought with a ferocity that sent Briggs's men scattering, some falling, others retreating in panic. Margaret reloaded and fired again, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. She saw one of Briggs's men go down, then another. The Apache warriors fought like shadows, moving faster than the eye could follow, their tactics flawless. Briggs's men, for all their bluster, were no match for warriors who had spent their entire lives honing their skills. Within minutes, the tide had turned. Briggs's men were in full retreat, several of them wounded, others throwing down their weapons and running. Briggs himself, his face pale with shock, yanked his horse around and fled, leaving his men to fend for themselves. Margaret stood, her chest heaving, her hands shaking. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. She looked around and saw that none of the Apache warriors had been seriously hurt. A few had minor wounds, but they were all standing, all alive. Relief flooded through her so intensely she thought her legs might give out. Takoda walked over to her, his face grim, but his eyes proud. "It is done." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Nashoba came to her other side, his hand finding hers. "You fought well," he said softly. Margaret looked at him, at the blood on his shirt, the dirt on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes, and she felt something break open inside her. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Either of you. All of you." The warriors began to gather, tending to their wounds, checking their weapons. One of them, a younger man with kind eyes, approached Margaret and spoke to her in halting English. "You are brave. You are one of us now." Margaret felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you all." The warriors stayed for the rest of the day, helping to repair the damage from the battle, ensuring that Briggs and his men did not return. As the sun began to set, they prepared to leave. Margaret stood on the porch, watching them mount their horses, and felt a pang of sadness. They had risked their lives for her, and now they were leaving. But Takoda and Nashoba remained. They stood beside her, silent and steady, and Margaret knew with a certainty that went bone deep that they were not going anywhere. They had chosen to stay, not out of duty, but out of something far deeper. That night, after the warriors had gone, Margaret sat by the fire with Takoda and Neshoba. The house was quiet, the only sound the crackling of the flames and the soft whisper of the wind outside. Margaret felt exhausted, drained, but also strangely at peace. Neshoba broke the silence first. "What will you do now?" Margaret looked at him, then at Takoda. "I'll keep this land. I'll rebuild. I'll live." Takoda nodded, his expression serious. "And we will be here, with you." Margaret felt her heart swell. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you stay?" Neshoba reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and sure. "Because this is where we belong. Because you have given us a home, a purpose. Because we—" He trailed off, glancing at Takoda. Takoda met his eyes and then looked at Margaret. "Because we care for you," he said simply. "More than we should, perhaps, but we do." Margaret felt the tears come again, but this time they were tears of joy. "I care for you too," she said, her voice breaking. "Both of you. I don't know how this happened or what it means, but I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." Neshoba smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile. "Then we will stay, for as long as you will have us." Takoda nodded, his rare smile appearing again. "For as long as you need us, or want us." Margaret looked at them, these two men who had come into her life in the most unexpected way, who had fought for her, protected her, and made her feel alive again. She stood and moved to sit between them, and they shifted to make room for her. Neshoba wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and Takoda rested his hand on her knee. The three of them sat there in the firelight, in the warmth and safety of the home they had defended together, and Margaret felt something she had not felt in years. She felt whole. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding. Margaret worked alongside Takoda and Neshoba, repairing the damage from the battle, tending to the land, slowly bringing life back to the ranch. The townspeople whispered, "Of course." They always did. But Margaret found that she no longer cared. Let them talk, let them judge. She had found something real, something true, and she would not give it up for the sake of their narrow-minded opinions. Takoda remained the quieter of the two, his presence steady and grounding. He taught Margaret things she had never known: how to track, how to read the land, how to move through the world with awareness and respect. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and wise. And there were moments, small and precious, when he would look at her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. Neshoba, on the other hand, was warmth and light. He made her laugh with stories of his childhood, of adventures and mishaps and lessons learned. He sang to her in the evenings, songs in his own language that she did not understand, but that soothed her soul nonetheless. And he touched her often, small gestures of affection that made her feel cherished and valued in a way she had never experienced before. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, Neshoba turned to her. "Margaret, may I ask you something?" Margaret looked at him, curious. "Of course." Neshoba hesitated, then took her hand. "Do you ever think about the future? About what comes next?" Margaret considered the question. "I think about it all the time. I think about keeping this land, about making it thrive, about—" She trailed off, her cheeks warming. Neshoba smiled gently. "About us?" Margaret nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, about us." Takoda, who had been silent, spoke up. "We have talked," he said quietly. "Neshoba and I, about what this is, about what we want." Margaret looked at him, her breath shallow. "And what do you want?" Takoda met her eyes, his gaze intense and unwavering. "We want to stay. We want to be with you, both of us." "If that is what you want—" Margaret felt her pulse quicken. She looked from Takoda to Neshoba and back again. "Both of you?" Neshoba nodded, his expression serious. "In our culture, it is not uncommon for a woman to have more than one partner, especially if those partners are brothers or close kin. It is about family, about support, about love that is shared and honored. We do not ask this lightly." We ask because we both care for you deeply, and we believe we can give you a life filled with safety, joy, and love." Margaret's mind spun. She had never imagined such a thing. The idea of being with one man again had seemed impossible enough, but two? And yet, as she looked at them, at the sincerity in their eyes, the warmth and strength they offered, she realized that this was what she wanted. She wanted both of them, wanted the different things they each brought into her life, wanted the completeness she felt when they were all together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I want that." Neshoba let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her into his arms. Margaret felt Dakota's hand on her back, steady and reassuring. They sat there, the three of them, wrapped in each other's warmth as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear. That night, for the first time, they shared the same bed. It was not rushed or frantic. It was gentle, reverent, a slow exploration of touch and sensation that left Margaret breathless and trembling. Neshoba kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, his hands tracing the curves of her body as if she were something precious and fragile. Dakota's touch was firmer, more grounding, his lips finding the places that made her gasp and shiver. Margaret felt alive in a way she had never felt before. She felt desired, cherished, worshipped. The years of loneliness and fear melted away under their hands, replaced by a warmth and connection that filled every empty space inside her. They moved together with a rhythm that felt natural, inevitable, as if they had always been meant to find each other, to come together in this way. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Margaret felt tears slide down her cheeks. Neshoba noticed and gently wiped them away. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. Margaret nodded, a smile breaking through the tears. "I'm more than all right. I'm happy. For the first time in so long, I'm truly happy." Dakota pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Then we have done what we set out to do." Margaret turned to look at him, her hand coming up to cup his scarred face. "You've done more than that. You've given me my life back." The months that followed were the happiest of Margaret's life. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Word spread, slowly at first, about the widow who lived with 2 Apache men, about the battle they had fought and won, about the strange but undeniable love that bound them together. Some condemned her, others, especially the women who had lived hard lives and knew the value of true partnership, looked at her with a kind of quiet envy and respect. Margaret did not care what anyone thought. She had found her family, her home, her heart. She woke each morning to the warmth of Dakota and Neshoba beside her, to the sound of their voices and the comfort of their presence. She worked the land with them, shared meals, shared laughter, shared the quiet moments of contentment that made life worth living. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat around the fire, Neshoba looked at her with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Margaret, do you know what today is?" Margaret frowned, trying to remember. "No, what?" Neshoba grinned. "It has been 1 year since we came to your door, 1 year since our father made his decision." Margaret's breath caught. A year. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. She looked at Dakota, who was smiling in that rare, beautiful way of his, and then back at Neshoba. 1 year, she repeated softly. Dakota reached out and took her hand. "And many more to come." Margaret felt the tears well up again, but this time they were tears of pure, unfiltered joy. She looked at the 2 men who had changed her life, who had given her hope and love, and a future she had never dared to dream of, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Many more," she agreed, her voice steady and strong. "Many, many more." Ray, and as the fire crackled and the stars shone overhead, Margaret Hale, once a widow alone and afraid, sat surrounded by love and warmth, and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. She had saved 2 girls, and in doing so had saved herself. She had found family in the most unexpected place, love in the most unexpected form, and a happiness that would last the rest of her days. If this story touched your heart, stay close. There are many more nights under western skies waiting for you.